And as for me, I was not allowed to touch those items since I was the one who was in need of those charms. So there was no way that I was allowed to touch any of the ritualistic items that we were supposed to use. So she didn't give me any help at that time when I had gone and visited her. I went back to the city. Then I traveled back after some time when I had gotten the opportunity. When my wife was not around, that was when I took my son. I then went with my son to that priestess's shrine, and when we went there, we did the rituals that were going to protect me and my businesses, because one of my uncles had cursed me and said that I will lose all of my businesses, and he didn't want me to lose my businesses only. He said that when I had lost all of my businesses that I had in Lagos, he wanted me to return back to the village as a poor boy, so much poor that I'll end up begging for a plate of food from his household. This is what he had said. So me, with the fear that I was going to be bewitched by my uncle, I then chose to do it first before anyone from my extended family could send a spiritual attack on me or on my family or on any of my businesses that I had worked so hard for them to be so successful like they were at that time. There was too much jealousy in the family. So when we arrived there, I was then taken into a dark room with my son. He was following behind me. That was where we spent the night locked up in that dark room. That room, Brother Nashi, it had no security whatsoever. It didn't have a door. It didn't have any window. But the strange part was that there was a full moon at the time when I had gone and visited that priestess. But what troubled me was that even though there was a full moon, but there was so much darkness in that room, as if there was someone that was pumping darkness into that room, because the light that was coming from the moon could not even get into that room. You could actually see that there was a great divide from the light that was coming from that moon that was so clear in the sky. And at the doorstep of that room in which we were locked up in throughout the night, all night long, I struggled to sleep because out of fear of being bitten by something very poisonous, I found it so difficult to fall asleep. And since I had been told that some unnatural things might happen to us throughout the night, so I kept on waiting in anticipation. Like if someone tells you that such and such a thing will happen to you, then you can't fall asleep because you keep on waiting for that thing that is supposed to happen to you. So the anticipation of that spiritual mystery that was going to happen to me and my son kept me from falling asleep throughout the night. That was when I started feeling something that was crawling all over my skin. This was after many hours when we had been locked in that dark room. So we had been told that if anything was going to happen, something that will be spiritual, if it happens, we were not supposed to scream because this was part of the ritual ceremony. So when this thing started happening, then my son woke up, and when he woke up, he started complaining, and he was telling me that it was as if there was something that was crawling all over his body. To me, he said, "Father, I think that maybe there is a spider that is crawling all over my body." And he wanted to scream because that thing kept on moving all over his body, because he could not see it and he could not touch it, because he kept on touching himself all over his body at the place where he thought that the spider was crawling all over his skin. When he wanted to scream, what I did, my brother, is that I held his mouth shut, because that priestess had told me that if we were going to scream, something bad was going to happen to me and my son, and the ritual ceremony was not going to be successful. as a father who wanted to provide for his family and who wanted to protect his business interests, I then got hold of my son and I pressed my hands around his mouth so that he cannot scream out loud, even though I was very afraid of everything that was happening in that dark room. When the morning came, my son was given a white chicken, which he was then instructed to slaughter, and the way that he was supposed to slaughter it, he was supposed to slaughter that chicken whilst he was holding the head of the chicken as if he was suffocating that chicken, and he was supposed to cut it not from the front of its neck but from the back of its neck. As to why he was given this instruction, I do not even know. After that white chicken had been given to him, I was then given an instruction that I had to kneel down in front of my son. After I had knelt down, then a circle of stones was made so that me and my son, we were both standing in the middle of that circle that was made out of stones. Then he was instructed to sprinkle the blood of that chicken after he had slaughtered it on my head. I was then given a very small tree branch, and I was told that I had to keep that branch in a very safe place at all the times. After that, I then paid the money, which was quite a large sum of money that was required for these charms that were meant to defend me and my businesses from my uncle and some of my jealous relatives. After this ceremony had been performed on me and my son, we then returned back home. I had been given a bottle of something that looked like pure water, and just before we had arrived back home, I was supposed to make my son drink all the contents that were inside that bottle of pure water that had been given to me. So along the way, even though my son had complained of severe heat that was making him to be so thirsty and hunger, because we had not eaten ever since we had left Lagos to go and perform this ritual ceremony, and as we were traveling back to Lagos, I had avoided buying my son anything that was going to quench his thirst. But what I did instead was that I had bought a large packet of chips that were so salty so as to make him more thirsty. And just when we were close to home, we were about 30-minute drive from home, I then offered my son that same bottle that had some fluids that looked like pure water inside, and he finished it all. I can say that from that day, that was when my son became very different. Now my son was no longer that boy who was always troublesome like what kids are supposed to be.